Okay, I would like to call to order the Concord School Building Committee Finance Subcommittee meeting of December 5th. We've got, as usual, what we like to do in this meeting is to start with the small project, the project that we're working on right now, and check in with that in terms of the budget and the process there, and then go to some of the larger financial issues for the entire project. Okay, so first off, I would like to just talk for a minute about where we are with the budget for this project, and have we now gotten FMMA into the budget?
So right now, we're finalizing the contract. There's just a couple of terms that we're working out with Stephen right now on the SMMA contract. But to date, we've got a contract for Hill for $399,800, and we've agreed in principle on a number with SMMA at $889,400, so just under $900,000. So the two combined order magnitude is about $1.2 million. I believe the budget is 1.5, so we've still got about $300,000 worth of contingency. So as we get into the design, if there's some additional exploratory that we want to do, if there's some unforeseens, if there's some additional geotechnical information, things like that, we have the ability to be able to cover that within.
So the 900 includes all of the subcontractors and the site and all that, and the traffic and all that stuff?
It does, and we actually asked them, a typical MSBA project would not include a full traffic study, would not include a full geotechnical, things of that nature. We've actually asked them to include that in the 900, so that number is a little bit higher than you might typically see on an MSBA project, but we've asked them to include those studies, because typically what happens is you get them under contract, and the first thing you do is give them a change order for the geotechnical and the traffic study and stuff. So we said just get it in there up front. Let's get it all inclusive. It also includes all the needs of investigating passive house and lead and things like that. If we were to pursue one of those, like there's a filing fee for lead, that would be an extra reimbursable. But the design, being in compliance with lead and being in compliance with passive house, anything of that nature, all that's included. We've also talked to them about the number of meetings that we may expect might be a little bit larger than the typical MSBA project, and we've asked them to include that. So we try to get a full value, for a full scope for that $900,000. I think that's a fair value.
And have you got that spread out, over a monthly?
We do, and what we have talked to them about is that right now we still have the potential for 3 schedule options. The really accelerated, the somewhat accelerated, and the standard. And we have to come to that resolution of which one of those we're going to proceed with in the very near future. But right now, that dollar value would cover any one of those 3 options. Okay. It's just, we need to kind of give some direction so we know if they're ramping up really fast or if they're taking the next year to do this.
And how are we to date? I guess it would be through November, right?
I think right now, today, we're good. We've done 2 invoices here from Hill, a little bit higher than we expected, but with the designer selection and stuff like that, it kind of catches up a little bit at the beginning. And now the Hill team is not necessarily stepping back, but we're not going to be as in the weeds. It's going to be the designer meeting with the school department over the next 30 to 60 days here, really getting an understanding of the educational program and actually starting to develop ideas for the building, as well as going through the Feingold Study and validating the findings of that study, reviewing new versus run-out, that type of thing. So it's really going to be design team heavy over the next 30 to 45 days.
Any other questions about the current budget or where we are?
Question. There was an issue, and I think you covered it because it's different phases or the different accelerated programs of the services. But there's a time between when we were not necessarily funded or not authorized from town meeting to when the vote was. Those services for the design services we covered through that period.
So the design services are covered complete through the end of SD, which is schematic design. So what will happen is, for example, whichever option we take, at one point the schematic design is going to be completed. We're then going to do an estimate The design team will do an estimate and Hill will do a separate estimate. We will reconcile those estimates and that's the value that we'll bring to the committee to bring to town meeting. At that point, there's kind of a go, no-go discussion, whether we pause the design team and wait through town meeting and wait to get everything approved and then move forward, or if we're wanting the design team to continue into the next phase, which is design development, and continue while we're going to town meeting. So that part is not included right now. That's not typically included, even like, again, using the MSBA model, you wait until the MSBA approval is, and then you go forward. A lot of towns do, right now, we're talking 45 days for town council review, and then another 45 days for the town meeting. With the MSBA, there's even more time in there, because you have to have the MSBA approval in there as well. But a lot of districts choose to go at risk on that next phase and keep the design process moving.
All right, just a question, and it's just a question. I don't know the answer to this, so I'm not trying to circumvent anything or whatever. If indeed our budget works out like we had said for this project, it's 1.2 instead of 1.5, is it possible to use that $300,000 as part of that cap?
That would help. It may not be enough to get you the full design development. I know I'm doing a similar size project right now, and to go the whole design development, which is approximately 7 to 8 months, it's about $1.6 million.
Yeah, but the gap.
But that short gap, that 45 days or whatever, if that 300,000 was still available, we could certainly expect that.
I don't know the rules though. I mean, we may or may not be able to do that.
Yeah, the warrant article was through schematic design, so we
Right.
have to have a conversation about
Right.
it.
All right. Any other current budget? And we expect to have the contract, do we? Imminently?
Maybe as soon as today. Yeah.
Oh, good. So all substantive issues are agreed?
Yeah, well, there's just a little bit on the indemnification that I sent back to Stephen yesterday, and hoping to have a resolution on that today.
Okay. Thank you. Now, I also wanted to talk just a little bit about, because we're starting to get more invoices in, a little bit about the invoice approval process, and John has done some, has a document here related to a policy related to that.
So this policy is.
Everybody have it in front of them?
Everybody at the table has it. I'm sorry, I don't have enough handout for the audience. This policy is still in draft form. It hasn't been approved by the town manager or the finance director in Concord. But there are several items that we're considering. One is for contracts. That will be the responsibility of the town manager to negotiate and approve contracts. And then we will get copies of the contracts to Hill, to the superintendent, and to the town will have a copy, and the contractor will have a copy. For purchase orders, at the moment, and this is definitely open for debate, a purchase order is when we approve funds, but we not necessarily expend the funds. For purchase orders, after the approval by the superintendent and a co-chair, the committee co-chair, the Concord Finance Department will be authorized to process a purchase order, and we have an internal processing process for processing the purchase order. I authorize all purchase orders. If it's over $5,000, the finance director authorizes it, and if over $25,000, the town manager also additionally authorizes it, and we will provide electronic copies to Hill and to the superintendent for that process, for those. For invoices, the current way that we have these guidelines set out is that Hill, all invoices will be sent to Hill for review and approval initially. Nothing will go through, that process is pretty firm, so everything will go to you first. And then they will go to the superintendent after they're approved, and the superintendent will put together a schedule of approved payments with supporting documents, and the supporting documents may be payment schedules or maybe other supporting documents that are involved with that. And After those are at the school department, they will put together a list of approved payments with their supporting documents and provide that to a committee co-chair to be scheduled on the next middle school building committee meeting. And then as a whole, individual invoices can be discussed at the committee meeting, but that will be voted or approved by the committee as a whole. With that, and individual invoices can be taken out if they want to. After it's approved by the building committee, the finance director in Concord will authorize the payment, and the payment will go through the finance department. We will provide copies to Hill, electronic copies with all the supporting data to Hill with checks, and to the school department and so forth. On occasion, there'll be change orders. Change orders occur when there's a contract change. That will be reviewed and approved by Hill, and then the change order will require the signature of the town manager, the superintendent, a committee co-chair, and the contractor for it to be authorized. And then we will increase or decrease the purchase order depending on what the change order is to the contract. Prevailing wage, because the state law requires workers to be paid a prevailing wage for work, construction work, not services work, not consulting work, but construction work. There's a requirement for the state that weekly prevailing wage schedules be certified and issued. At the moment, it'll be Hill's responsibilities to gather those and manage those. Hill will provide electronic copies to the school department and the finance department for our records. Retention of records, because this is a borrowing, we are required to retain all records for 1 year after the end of the last payment of the loan, of the borrowing. So that could be 30 or 40 years out. So, and that copies can be electronic forms. Hill has suggested that they will keep all documents, and then at the end of the project will provide us with a thumb drive or some kind of documentation so that we can have it for our files. But as a backup, the school department and the finance department will also keep copies. So this is a very tentative draft of what we're thinking of. This has not been approved by the town manager or by the finance director. We are very open to any changes that the committee, this committee, or the general committee would like to make on it. And I may have left many things out, so if there are, let me know.
I have a question about the prevailing wage. Is that something that's going to change over the course of the project, or?
It can. Typically what happens is so the prevailing wage typically applies to the contractor, not necessarily the design team, things like that. And what happens is within 60 days of putting it out to bid, we contact the state and they give us the current prevailing wage based on the town of Concord. Because if you go to Concord or if you went to Carlisle, it's geographically, it might be slightly different. If you go to another town, they're all close, but they're slightly different. So it'll be based off of Concord. If the job goes for more than 1 year, after 1 year, we're required to ask for an update on that, and we provide that to the contractors as well. But when you get that prevailing wage log, it's based off of a lot of factors, one of them being union contracts, for example. So I'll pick trade plumbing. If there's already a union agreement made for the next 2 years or 3 years, you might actually see the wage increases every 6 months for that 2 year period already on the initial document. But what happens is as new contracts come up and stuff, they do update it regularly. But it's something that it's pretty standard for us to work with on that.
Thank you.
On I probably asked you before, what kind of cycle do you work on with invoices?
So invoices, if we receive an invoice by 2 o'clock on a Friday, we can process that for a check to go out the following Thursday. So that's it's about a 6-day lead time for us to put that through our system.
Okay, but just sort of practically in this process, will a couple of weeks or a month's worth of these be within the approval process. We won't be doing every one individually, right? There usually is some.
Yeah, so what we'll try and do is coordinate the delivery. For example, our invoices are typically done at the end of the month, so the 30th comes, or the 31st, whatever, that month. I typically get a draft invoice in my office the following week, so that first week of the month. We try to review that draft, finalize it, put a cover letter on it, and get it to the superintendent. I'll say no later than, say, the 10th of the month.
Yeah.
So that's what we'll probably be targeting, is asking everybody to get everything in for the beginning of the month, that first week and the first, second week, so that we can get it to review, and then potentially second, third week of the month, we'd be looking to have a.
Because with a process like
monthly
this,
review.
if you have a group, these are the invoices for this 2-week period.
Yeah,
It makes it a lot more efficient, I think,
yeah.
It looks like 2 or 3 people that might have to look at it, right?
And early on, we really should only be having probably 2 invoices, for this first phase, if you will. You're not gonna probably have a lot more than the Hill and the SMMA invoices.
Any of their subcontractors, both on contracts or invoices, go to the designer, right?
Right, so SMMA is gonna give us 1 invoice, and it's gonna have backup.
Right.
And it'll have maybe a dozen different subcontractors working for them
So
on that
in
invoice.
terms of the contract section of this, is we have 2 major contracts, and we won't see any others, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Any other, how are, you're affected by this more than anybody else, you know?
Well, really, John is, but this is what I'm used to. So,
Yeah.
usually by the 10th, and then about 2 weeks to process. MSBA, you submit it, and you only get reimbursable, is it 1 time a month?
Yeah,
So,
maybe even once a quarter sometimes.
yeah, right. Right. So, but I would get payments processed once a month. That would be my recommendation.
This is really good. This is small now, but when you get into the
yeah.
building,
It's not
it's
small
not
either.
small, it's a book. And
Right.
you're looking at it, in an aggregate very often, yeah.
Yeah. I think the only, I'd have 2 comments if I can. One, just real quick on the change order part. I would say a change order shall be reviewed and recommended for approval by Hill. I don't think we technically want or have the authority to approve a change order. I think that's gonna typically come to either the superintendent or the committee. So we'll make a recommendation for approval. We'll sign off on it and make that recommendation, but I don't think,
And I should probably
Yeah.
put that for invoices too. Did I use the same language?
um,
I said reviewed and approved. So I'm saying approved as you're giving your okay.
I'm saying approved on invoices would probably be fine, because we're
Okay.
saying we're approving that
Yeah.
invoice. The change order, just because it's a change to a contract document, we want to make the recommendation for approval. And then, I don't think it's a big deal right now, again, for this first phase, for the designer and the contract, but when we get into the contract and with the contractor, change orders tend to have to move faster.
Yeah.
So there should be maybe a discussion on that of, what some districts do is they allow the superintendent, for example, to approve a change order up to a certain value, maybe up to $100,000 or something like that. And then it comes to the committee at the very next available meeting. So that way there, we're not stopping the process. We're not waiting once a month for a committee to meet to allow change orders to move forward. But that's something, we've got a year plus to kind of work that detail out. But,
So currently, we're just asking for one co-chair of the committee to approve. We're not actually going,
that's
change orders are not going back to the full
I think
committee.
that's, if the town is comfortable with that, I think that's a great option.
Yeah, I think for the approval process, I think the committee at the next meeting should hear any significant change order, not in the sense of approval, so they understand it,
Oh,
understand
absolutely.
what's going on, yeah.
Just a question that I have, because the volume is very low now, but when construction happens, the volume for invoices, will the schedule of having the committee meet and approve and then getting invoices out, and the committee meets monthly or at whenever, however, will that be sufficient for the processing of payments?
I think that will be fine, because even when we get into construction, in reality, 90% of the costs are going to be design, contractor, and OPM. It's really, the OPM, the contractor, again, may have 30 or 40 subs working for them, or even more, but they're gonna give us one package once per month. And that package is going to be reviewed by Hill and the design team first, and adjustments made, and then we're gonna bring it. So there's a process there, and again, what we typically do with them is, we ask them by the 22nd of the month to project out to the end of the month.
Yeah.
And that 22nd to the 30th is the time that the design team, Hill, and the contractor have to kind of review it and go back and forth, so that by the end of the month, by the 1st or 2nd, they're giving us their final draft, and then we tie up to that same type of time schedule.
Well, we did with the high school set up, we used the equivalent of this committee, a finance committee, and scheduled that meeting date to the cycle of the billing, so we could do that, we could do it quickly. And then the finance committee would just report back to the full committee of what had happened in the 1 or 2 meetings they might have had. Because the finance committee was meeting every couple of weeks when the project was very significant.
Yeah, I mean, there are other invoices and stuff like that with FF&E and stuff like that, but it's really, it's the 3 main, so we can work that out.
There's a building review committee that usually occurs every week. That's where the real action is.
Yes.
And then you're talking about what they need to do this week, and it's got to move fast and all that. You'll see it all happen when we get into that phase. Any other questions about this process? I would assume you're pretty.
So we still need review by the town manager and the finance
Okay,
director.
so if we have anything, people can take a little closer look at this at their own. If you have anything, get it back to John, and then I would assume in a couple of weeks or whatever, we'll see a final copy of it.
In the meantime, we have invoice number 2 from Phil. And the invoice number 1 was approved by the co-chairs of the committee and by the superintendent. We can go through that process again so that we can get that invoice paid if that's acceptable.
All right, anything else on this part? Okay, we're gonna kind of move to the bigger issue. I got some extra copies of what I'm about to talk about. I did a little work on this because we're starting to approach some of the bigger issues related to cost on the project. And there's a little document here, it's 4 pages. And what I tried to step back and say, where we are right now, what are sort of large financial issues that we're looking at. And I sort of grouped it on this first page into 3. And the biggest one, of course, is where are we on the overall cost of the project? And we don't know that now, okay? This is a process that involves the designer ultimately going down into the details and understanding that. But as we move along, we want to stay in touch with where we are and what are the factors and context relating to the overall cost. So that's one of the things. The second is a couple of issues related to the implicit direction that we've been going down. And I go back to the meeting, the April presentation to the town, because that's the last time we've kind of formally talked to the town about cost issues, okay, in a sense. And I like to anchor that. I think it's very important that the committee stays in touch with the things that they have presented to the town in terms of this is where we are, and always come back to that so there aren't any surprises, okay? I think that's really important in this process. And the 2 other things that we talked to at that meeting that I think are significant, there's a lot of issues in that describe why we need a school and the qualitative aspects of all of that. But from a financial standpoint, we made an implicit decision that we were going down a path of a new building versus a renovation of the old buildings, okay? And I want, the second one is we also made the task, we also made an implicit decision that this go it alone without the MSBA, okay? And both of those had financial underpinnings that were outlined within that committee. My want to do very briefly is revisit those on a sort of very high level. What were those decisions and the financial underpinnings? And is there anything that we perceive has changed? And what do we need to do to verify those findings in this project? Okay, because there's some work that has to begin with SMMA in terms of what came out of the Feingold Study and these 2 decisions. So it'll become clearer as we go through this. So I kind of want to start with the first thing. And if we go back just to touch base, and I don't want to dwell on this too much, there are 2 reasons to do this. It provides context for us in the decision making, but also this group right here will now, going forward, be called upon to often explain where we are versus where we were before, okay? So I just wanted to make sure that we come back and touch base with what we said in our presentation to the town. First off, in that town presentation, it was clearly said that we know a lot of things from the Feingold Alexander report, but we don't know everything. We haven't detailed the cost and design of the building, okay? So I say that as a caveat. And there are also in that a whole raft of information was presented about the compelling evidence and the need for a new building. What I'm focusing on here is simply kind of the financial conclusions. So the important things, the average square foot that was used in the projection that was made was $648, which was the MSBA 2019-2020 projection of what middle school projects cost per square foot. From the Feingold Alexander study, okay, I went back over that study, it's 83 pages, suggests 125,000 square foot building. So they did the work to drill down on the details to the point where they estimated 125,000 square foot for the building. That would net with the population of the schools a building that would cost in 2019 dollars approximately $81 million. Now that's simply taking the square footage, multiplying times the number of square foot, or the cost per square foot that the MSBA said. This is what we presented to the town. And the construction growth, the presentation indicated construction growth had averaged 6.93% per year. So before town meeting, it was estimated given the best timeline, likely cost would be in the 90 million plus range. Okay, that's the last thing we said. And in our working with this committee, we've used a range of $80 to $100 million. So those are the numbers we've been working about.
Tim, I just have a question. When you say best timeline, do you mean the shortest one, or not necessarily?
No, I think it was their best guess at the timeline. Okay, at that point, I was summarizing a lot of information here. Okay, I also note here that during the town meeting discussion, an amendment was passed encouraging the project to be net zero ready, including sustainability. So, okay, that wasn't necessarily part of the Feingold study.
It's
okay.
not at all part
So I note that here, okay, as an important thing. And so that's kind of the baseline. That's the last time we spoke. But we've been gaining information. And with that, I'm going to let Mike talk a little bit to the information that we have gained in the last several months.
So one of the things we've tried to do is take a look at other projects that the MSBA is doing that are similar type projects, similar size projects. And I do have a sheet here. If anybody in the audience needs, I have a couple extras. And that's the same sheet that's up on the screen here. So what we've tried to do is take a look at a number of schools. We've focused on the new schools right now. We do have a couple of, or one ad reno in there, just to kind of use it as reference. But based off the Feingold study, it was assuming a new building, so that's why we wanted to compare it to a new building. There's various delivery methods here. Some are 149, some are 149A. So we've got a good mix there. And there's not 10 middle schools that have 760 kids. So some of them have a little more, some have a little less. It's trying to get an average. So, and understanding that every building is different, every school department has different program requirements, there's different site logistics requirements, things of that nature. It's not always an apples to apples, but it's a good, I think getting the number of schools that we have here is a good cross-section and a good way to look at it. So what we've done is we've taken a look at the Feingold study, and that's what we've got in column G. I think our numbers are slightly different than what Tim just had. I think he had 81, we have 83, but we're projecting it out to start in 2022. That is, when we were talking the 3 schedule options, that's the slow option. or the standard option. I don't want to say it's slow, but it's the standard, the standard process, you'd be starting that late. And that might be, again, that's a round number, that's probably plus or minus 6 months either way, probably gonna be starting a little sooner.
Yeah, I just want to be sure we're qualifying everything about the Feingold study as a design developed with no context, with no feedback on what we're looking for in a school, with very, very little information other than let's build new.
It was very high level.
Very, very high level. So I think we want to be
Yeah,
sure we've said
the whole
said
context
that.
was to try to
Yeah.
make that decision, whether new or renovate.
Right,
was
and
the
you
thing.
needed a place to go to make the decision, but we just want to remember that that did not have a design process to it.
Right.
Or any conversation, even what they potentially sketched out or thought could work. So it's a very limited factor here.
Right.
But it's all we had, so.
Exactly, so, we did it with the best information we had at the time. I think we've got more information
Yeah.
now, and I think we've started setting up meetings with SMMA, and we're gonna have a lot better information in 2 weeks, and in 4
Yes.
weeks, and in 6 weeks. That's really what SMMA is gonna be doing over the next 45 to 60 days is two parts. Is one, understanding what we need from a program standpoint, and two, validating the information that was provided with the Feingold study. So what we did, we showed a draft of this last time, and I think there was a couple of questions asked last time, a couple requests made. Based off those requests, we've added on line 7, you can see up on the screen there, it's gross square foot per student. It's about the 7th line down, if you will, on the printout. So we showed what the amount of square footage you'd have per student based off of each of the designs. We've also showed the cost per square foot, as well as we've normalized these costs because, again, some of these projects started I think as long as 6 years ago. Some of them are in process right now. So we're trying to get everything back to a date. So that January 1st of 2022, I won't say, I wouldn't get hung up on the date itself. It's just trying to get everything to a baseline, basically. And what we've done there is you've got the cost per square foot, you've got the cost per student, and you've also got the square footage per student. And we've done that across the page here, and I'm gonna scroll down a little bit here. So this middle part here from line 99 to 122 is just taking all the information up above and kind of making it a little bit more manageable, a little bit easier to understand. So we've listed all the districts. We've listed the square foot per student that each district has in their building. We've listed the cost per square foot in 2022, and then the cost per student, because those were kind of 3 of the categories that we wanted to look at. And then we actually, at the bottom of that, on that line 112, we gave the average across all the buildings of each of those. So that was, again, without understanding the programming or anything like that, it's just a way of seeing where are middle schools falling over the last few years. And then on the bottom of the page there, you can see the yellow highlighted area. That again is based off the Feingold study. And that shows that we would have 167 square feet per student at $658 a square foot, 126,000 square feet, and that's the $83 million. That's the 80 to $100 million. Based on the average school, if we use the average, the square foot per student goes up by about 11 square feet per student. The cost per square foot actually goes up quite a bit. And that ends up being at the 97. So we're still in that $80 to $100 million range if we were the average school. The last line I threw in there just as a point of reference, because I know many members of the committee have gone to the Gates School, and there's been a lot of discussion on the Gates School. And while the cost per square foot was actually lower than the average there, the square foot per student was much greater than the average there. And if we were to build a Gates equivalent, if you will, with our student population based on the time period, that's showing potentially $122 million as cost. So it's just to kind of put it into perspective for people.
Yeah, I think part of what our work is going to be to charge SMMA with some of the outcomes and opportunities Gates affords in a affordable way.
Right.
And the other thing I would like to mention, I think Tim mentioned it at the opening here, is that I think Gates might be more in line with net zero. It's still not net zero. The average school up there is not a net zero school.
Correct.
It's not
I don't
a,
think Gates is even that close.
I don't, yeah, I think Gates is maybe better than the average, but
Yeah.
it's not a net zero, so,
I mean, Lexington has got a lot of the elements that we've been
Correct.
talking about.
and I think that net zero, HVAC wise, your upfront costs are probably actually less than, because the HVAC systems are less, but then your operational costs might be more, so there's always factors there, but I think it's just something to keep in the back of your mind. I'm not saying that there's going to be substantial additional costs, but I do think that driving towards that net zero definitely, when you're increasing wall thicknesses and insulations and stuff like that, there is going to be additional costs with things like that.
So re-emphasizing again, we're just trying to get context right now. We haven't designed the building, we haven't come up with a number that the building is going to cost, any of that. But the more information that you have, the better in terms of understanding why you want to target and why you're targeting that is what we're trying to get to right now. It seems clear that one of the issues that we have to think about carefully is the square footage, right? Because that's, when you look at the variables that are driving a significant difference in square footage.
It definitely is.
And then just in terms of feedback, knowing what's different from the 125 to the larger number, okay? In terms of, what is that different made up of, okay?
Right.
Okay, I think that's really important. I think we have to think about the issues we just talked about, sustainability. I'm very sensitive to not drawing out this or that. I think the committee is not trying to balance, we're going to give up education to do sustainability or vice versa, right? We view this holistically in terms of goals that we have, but it's an issue that we have to think through. I think on the square footage issues, and quite understandably, the town has a great many desires for the building in terms of serving other functions for the town, and I don't have any quarrel with that, but it will impact square footage, and we have to think through that and the cost that we may incur for those additional items. I think there are others. There's certainly the quality that we see in terms of the products that we've seen from the other schools, and it's a qualitative judgment of we like this versus we don't like this, and it's a hard one to put specific numbers on, but you can see in sort of the larger sense, the Gates is very high quality, okay, in terms of what we saw, so you can see that in the numbers. Those are some of the things I think about in terms of the takeaways here.
And I think the town or the district recently went to Hanscom as well. That's not an MSBA project, but SMA and their consultants have a lot of overlap there, so we're trying to get some numbers for you to kind of see where that would fall as well.
Yeah, that would be.
The other thing, to your point on the square footage, is that all these other projects are MSBA projects, I believe. We at least most of them are. I think the square footage here is driven not only by the program, the educational program of the district, but it's also driven by the requirements of the MSBA. The MSBA tries to standardize schools as much as they can. They want to give you the flexibility, but they have a specific range, for example, for the size of a classroom, and you have to fall within that range. They have a specific range for the size of a science classroom, for gymnasiums, for everything. They don't allow auditoriums. So if we're bringing an auditorium, that potentially is over and above the square footage that anybody else is showing here right now. A lot of districts want to have oversized gymnasiums, and the MSBA allows it, but it's at the district cost. So again, that tends to push districts to not oversize their gymnasiums. So there's things like that we better understand and decide. But there's pluses and minuses there. The MSBA requirement for science classrooms, for example, is probably larger than I would say a typical
Yeah, I mean,
middle
every
school
district
requires,
ends up
but
battling over some
the
limit they put on something that they wish was higher.
Can I ask a question? What is the MSBA range for the size of a classroom?
I'd have to go back but I believe right now it's between 800 and 950. for a typical classroom.
And I guess there's no way to break down to the MSBA requirement for square feet per student.
So there is a format, it's a space summary format that you can
Yeah.
basically plug everything into, and it will tell you if you're within the MSBA range or not, and then you can make adjustments, and we've actually asked SLMA to do that. They've made a first pass at it, but what we told them is, they've given it to Hill. We've actually said before we start disseminating that to the district even, we want them to have at least 1 or 2 meetings with the superintendent to understand the program, because we don't want to send something out that is drastically different based off the program. So we want them to start understanding that program a little bit more, and that's something that I'd say maybe by New Year's is something that we're shooting to be able to start presenting to people and actually have people actually take a look at it and understand. Right.
One of the questions I have in regard to that is that as we see these new schools that are oriented to the fundamental new strategy related to education, okay, the shared rooms and the open space, and it seems like it's a harder, the specific size of the classroom is more
It's a good
difficult,
question.
right?
Yeah.
Because there's several different kinds of space in what they call these neighborhoods that, service a number of kids, and it's in the MSBA guidelines, is that considered now? Is that?
I think it's, again, the guidelines are trying to evolve and keep up with the times. Maker spaces weren't in the guidelines 5 years ago, or 8 years ago. They're starting to become more the norm, and they're starting to be accepted in there. I mentioned the science classrooms. I'm doing 2 different middle schools for one town, and they're 2 years apart, and the science classrooms went up by 10% from one school to the
Oh,
other
boy.
because of the MSBA guidelines. The guidelines changed last February. So the guidelines aren't a set in stone thing. They are reviewed annually with what towns are coming with, what districts are coming with, what is the latest understanding of the best educational process, and they are trying to adapt to that. So they're very,
So the notion is to
Yeah.
use it as a guideline,
right,
and we're, particularly in this case, when we're designing.
right.
uh,
And part of the program, the MSBA, we just asked about the classrooms, the 800 to 950, that's for 24 students. So does your program expect 24 students per class, or 20, or 30? So there's, again, that adjustment that you'll have to make according to your program. And again, if you're 24 today, it doesn't mean you can't be 26 or 20 tomorrow.
Yeah.
So you want to have that flexibility built into your program.
Remember, this discussion is going to take place in detail over the next 3 to 4 months, right? with the designer. So we will not answer all these questions today. But any other comments or related to the information that we saw here? Yeah. Okay, I think there was obviously a challenge inherent to this, but on the other hand, it's not totally unreasonable, right? We're
Yeah.
seeing numbers that are attainable if we work at it. Yeah, I'll do it for here. We usually do it at the end. That's good.
I just have
There's
a
small
question
number of people.
regarding the projection of student body size. Is this the current body size? Are you projecting out to the future? And then looking at new residential construction, taking into account like how many more students we may have in the next 10 years?
We're always watching enrollments, and certainly in this project, we're gonna do our best to project. We work with NESDEC for that purpose, as well as the town, and knowing what new growth might be expected. And we've got another swing factor in terms of return of kids from private schools. So we're gonna do our best. We think it's not too far off of where we are now, so there's gonna be some cushion needed there, but it's not gonna be what other districts have faced. I don't see where we're growing by half or something like that. So certainly it's got to be part of the discussion.
I think the other thing to keep in mind is when we're designing this, we're not designing it for the exact number.
Right.
You've got 3 different grades in a school, and you may have that blip where there's one
Right.
class that comes up. I know I have one district where they have a class, the 6th grade class in Braintree right now is literally one full classroom size bigger than
Right.
either grade on either side of it.
Yes.
So they literally have a teacher
They're in
moving
4th
up
grade
every
right
year.
now.
Right, yeah, you're
Yeah.
4th grade. So you need to plan for that, and you need to have that flexibility. So when you're designing for a classroom of 24, it really is a range of
Right.
X to Y, and you gotta have some flexibility.
The other interesting piece, the elementary enrollments are actually down some. So as kids, and we always expect there'll be some level of filling in, but the biggest numbers right now are at the early grades at the high school and at the middle school. So we could, in my very quick overview, you could almost build for where we're at and still have cushion for growth because of what the elementary numbers are right now, so.
And again, inherent to this process that the designer will go through is
It's
a
a real
pretty strong analysis
full
of that.
study, right.
Right there, okay. Any other comments? Okay. All right, thanks for that work. The next page, 3, goes to this question of, and the reason I'm putting this is we have to give some instruction to SNMA as to what to do relating to the feasibility aspects, okay? And that being, we've made an implicit decision that we're not doing renovation. We're going to a new building, but I think we may want them to verify some of the things that came out of the Feingold Study. So just again to summarize what was presented at the last time we were before the town meeting. Feingold, that was a study that was done and completed in 2017. They were asked 3 questions. What would it take to stay in these 2 current buildings for 10 years? What are the options and estimated costs for a renovation project of taking the current buildings and your best effort of what would to renovate that to accommodate the new school? And what are the options and costs for a new building? And they provided a report, okay, that I just want to mention here that the conditions of the building and the educational process were outlined in there in some pretty graphic pictures and about why we need a new school. So there's all these issues of doing. The reason I'm saying this is when you're just looking at a page of numbers, it gets to be a dry discussion, but it's not. There's a whole set of reasons that the school needs to be rebuilt that were articulated in the presentation very well. But to go to the conclusions for the 10-year outlook, the conclusion was it was going to take $34 to $47 million just to get those buildings into the shape to provide a reasonable educational opportunity over the next 10 years. Okay, so that was, I think, an eye-opener in terms of how much it would cost for these buildings that are either 50 or very close to 50 years old, the 2 buildings. Okay, and then when they looked at the next phase, what would a renovation look like that would have a 50-year outlook? Okay, renovate the buildings for a 50-year horizon. What would that take? Okay, the cost to renovate both of the current buildings in place was about $68 million. Okay, so a significant amount of money, and it doesn't do anything to the fact that they are 2 buildings, and that's inefficient in terms of the educational process. Then they looked at taking Sanborn and doing a major renovation in addition to that in order to accommodate the 50-year look, and that came out about $61 million. And then when they did their preliminary look at a new building for the 50 years, and that was $68 million. And I think for what the budget they had and the effort they had, they did a good job in terms of looking at the numbers and the specifics of it. And that the study was designed to enable the town to make a decision about what direction they wanted to go. So given these numbers, it resulted in the decision that the school committee made to come before the town for a new building process. Okay, so that's sort of the background. And the question that we have is, what do we want to do in terms of validating these numbers? And because SMA is starting their work, and It's open for discussion here. I think some comments that I would make, having gone through it recently, I think the work, while limited in its scope and not looking at a new educational program, it was thorough and detailed, and there's no reason to doubt that it was accurate, okay? Generally accurate in terms of the conclusions they raised. I think we probably want to ask SMMA to, and use your words, validate, okay, within a reasonable time frame. I think it seems to me the bulk of our work, given the decision we've made, is toward a new building, so we want to get them focused and working on that as rapidly as possible, but to do enough to give us a reasonable second opinion on the conclusion. So when we're asked, either individually or collectively at a meeting, what about renovation? We can reference the work that's been done before, but we can also say we had our designer look at it and validate it. So that's my cut on it. But I would like this group to make a recommendation to the full committee because it's sort of a financial issue. So I would be interested in people's opinions.
I'll start if it. So basically, we've already, in that $900,000 number I talked about earlier with SMMA, we've already required them to do a validation of it, and part of that validation is it's a multi-step process here. So the contract for SMMA right now is for feasibility and then schematic design. So this first part, feasibility, relating it to an MSBA process. In that feasibility process, the MSBA requires you to give an option of just renovating the existing buildings, which is one of the ones that you had here. They require you to do an option, at least one option of an addition and renovation to one of the buildings. And they require you to do an option of a new building.
Right.
We're not requiring that of SMMA. We're requiring them to validate the Feingold Study. We're requiring them to do an existing conditions survey of the buildings, specifically of the Sanborn site, because we feel that that's the better of the two sites if you were going to do an addition renovation, and understand the building. As they're doing those things, they're meeting with the district and understanding the educational program. And that educational program part is one part that Feingold didn't really have in their study, not to that level of detail.
Right.
So they're going to understand the program, and as they're understanding that program, they're starting to develop options. So they're going to be developing these new options. You know, there might be a building with multiple wings, there might be a building with multiple stories. You know, they're going to give different options for the district to review and provide feedback on. At the same time, they're going to be evaluating the findings from Feingold against the new program and coming back with a confirmation that, yes, we believe the Feingold study was correct, that the new building option is the right choice. Or they might come back and say, Joe, we think that you should revisit the addition renovation. And when they give us their options, they'll give us addition renovation options. So you're really going to have that ability. We haven't cut that potential to have addition renovation options on the table. It doesn't mean that ultimately would be the one you would choose, but we're trying to keep it open, basically.
It's a little different, right? Because we've done this study before, and
Right.
This is not the normal, feasibility and it's the design. So I don't at all view this as rubber stamp. I want a valid second opinion that the new building is the right financial way to go. That's what we're looking for. Other comments and observations?
We do need to validate it. Having lived these schools for the last few years, I can't imagine the outcome is that it's fiscally responsible to try to renovate Sanborn and add on. Educationally, I can't imagine trying to create what we hope for either. So I know we need to do that, and it's important that we do that. I'd like to be efficient about that validation, I think would be my request.
Yeah. As a committee, we have to
Of course.
look to the town and say, we've looked at this
Of course.
thoroughly. renovation is not the financially right decision for us, right? And that's what we're asking them to validate.
And I think a quick part of that validation, or an important part of that validation, is understanding the overall square footage you need and how you could add on to that building. Like,
Yeah.
what's the logical way? And I'll tell you, when you have a building that you're renovating and you have to put a small addition on, that becomes more logical than when you're starting to do a larger addition.
Yeah.
When the additions start to get larger, or when there's not really a good place to put an addition on, that's when you really start leaning towards the new building options. And I think the fact that you have a large population in two different locations and you're trying to bring them into one location
Right.
is really going to mean that an addition would have to be a very large addition, and that's when
Yeah.
you tend to
And they
push
should
towards the
be
new
able,
building
given their
options.
work at Lincoln, they should be able to speak pretty eloquently to that
Yeah, I
process,
think the
right?
sustainability part
Yeah.
would concern me greatly.
Well, and that's the
Trying to
other thing.
renovate.
The sustainability part, you're not gonna, it'd be very difficult to renovate Sanborn and still try for the net zero option, right? You know?
Yeah, very, very difficult, I would think, yeah.
So would it be fair to say the conclusion we could present to the larger committee is the Finance Committee recommends that they take a good look to validate the Feingold in a reasonable timeframe? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. If we go to the fourth page, the next conclusion, or the last premise that was put before the town meeting in charge for this group was related to the potential to go it alone without MSBA funding. And these are the things that were presented to the town at this time, the assumptions. The assumptions in the analysis were that would be accepted into the 2019 MSBA, and that's not necessarily guaranteed. I think we're into the second round, is that right?
Yeah, I should hear any day.
Yeah.
It's not just not guaranteed, it's
And that's a longer,
unlikely.
it's a
Right.
longer process, okay? In the presentation, it could be a 2-year delay versus going into that process could be
Yeah.
another 2-year delay to
Easily.
the schedules that we're looking at easily. There's escalation, and that the reason that delay is important, escalation costs of 3 to 7% per year based on MSBA projects. And for the numbers that they presented, they used that cost that we talked about before of approximately $90 million for the middle school. So if they did that, and this is what was presented, the escalation costs were somewhere between $5 and $15 million for a 2-year delay. There's a redundant sort of increased operational cost of these two buildings of about $500,000, so that's another $1 million related to the.
That's probably conservative.
Yeah, I think. And there's another, but I didn't totally understand, but it's a small number, $200,000 capital maintenance costs for a total of about somewhere between $6 and $16.5 million of additional costs that might be related to that 2-year delay of the MSBA funding. And then if something bad happens, which, with 50-year-old buildings can easily occur, could be more than that. There were specific things outlined related to the heating lines for $1 million, the roofs, which are in pretty bad condition, could be $4.5 million to replace the roofs on the building. The septic system is very old. So another $0 to $6 million could be incurred over that time frame. So the total cost, and this is the presentation that was made, the total cost of waiting a year could be somewhere between $7 million to $22 million. And that was sort of looked at versus MSBA reimbursement. For the high school, the nominal rate was 35%. The effective rate, when everything they disallow is taken out, was about 29%. For this analysis, the effective rate was estimated to be somewhere between 20 and 25%. The affluent town class is not going up in terms of the amount of money they're getting, and Mike was just telling me that the difference between the nominal rate and the effective rate is increasing. It seems to be increasing in projects as more things disallowed. Okay. Recently, so the estimate was that the reimbursement would be in the neighborhood for a $90 million school of $18 to $22 million, $22.5 million. So the thought at that point is that's very close to what the increased cost might be, okay? And that's why we decided to move forward with this committee and begin designing a new school on our own basis. Again, what we've learned, we've made it to the second round. A small percentage of the second round people are actually, it's like a third or 20, 25.
It's not even.
Not
I
even.
think typically you've got, I think last year there was almost 100 applicants and only 18 got into the program. So it's probably in the 20 to 25% range.
Yeah, we're down, we currently are in the remaining 30. Of those, they'll fund what they can afford to. So typically it's 12 projects a year or so.
So there is a chance, it's not a likely chance, we would have to restart over with a new committee, a new process, a new study, all of those things. And I don't think we have learned anything in the interim that changes the conclusions that were made at the time we made these decisions. What I wrote here and what I think is prudent is that we ask Hill to do an analysis of that says here is a potential timeline if we were approved, so we're ready with this, okay?
I would just suggest I literally should hear any day.
Yeah.
It might be worth waiting rather than spending time to do that if we're gonna have the factual answer.
Okay, I just want to be prepared, because if it's announced that we were approved, the question will come up, are we going to do this, and why are we, or why are we not? And do we have good information for that? And I think it is, if it's imminent, we'll know or not.
Imminent.
If it's not, I think,
Yeah, no, it's typically the week after Thanksgiving, so here we are.
yeah. All right, but I think the net is, I don't see anything that has changed relating to the analysis that would cause us to make a different decision at this point.
No, I think we could certainly do our own version of this, but if anything, I would think that the 20 to 25% reimbursement might even be a little high right now. So it might be, because what's happening is escalation is growing. You noted 3 to 7%.
Yeah.
It's actually on the higher end right now,
Yeah.
and the MSBA has a cap on the cost per square foot, and that cap by law can only go up by a certain percentage every year, and it's not keeping up with inflation right now.
Yeah.
So that gap is growing every year.
By the way, I don't think this is a deep analysis.
Yeah.
You know the MSBA process, I'm sure, in the back of your hand, laying it out there for that cost and what,
Yeah.
and what the delays would mean using some reasonable estimations of escalation is a pretty
I mean, the
straightforward.
informal, off-the-record feedback when they toured was supportive of the direction we took, and I'll leave it at that. But, even relative to cost, because they were informally talking through timelines with me and factoring some of the same things in, and feeling that there definitely was some validation.
Yeah.
We had not been wrong to get started.
Yeah, again, I think it's very important that we do our financial due diligence to answer the questions of the town. If somebody's going to give you
Absolutely.
$20 million, why aren't you taking it, right? And there are very good reasons why that is or is not the case, right?
Right.
Absolutely.
Any other comments?
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add, the Student Opportunity Act that was just funded, potentially there was going to be additional funds to MSBA in there. That actually didn't survive the process. There's a discussion point to keep looking at how to get more funds to MSBA. So that was something I was watching to see if it might increase the monies they had to spend, but that didn't come to fruition. So they're gonna have that same $550 million or so to spend on
After all that.
however many schools. We got other positives out of the Student Opportunity Act, so I'm not complaining at all, but that part didn't stay, so.
So I think it would be a fair conclusion that if we should hear about MSBA, if there is some indication that we might be invited, we would ask you to do this analysis.
Yes, certainly.
Okay. Is that a fair
Yeah.
conclusion of what we recommend to the committee? Okay.
So Andy is actually out on vacation right now. He's back next week. So by the time he's back, we haven't heard. We can start it at that point. If we've heard, then we'll know.
Right.
All right, any other comments or observations relating to the last two items that we discussed. All right, that's kind of what we have for today, so. I take any general comments from anybody who's here if they'd like. Yes?
Hi, can I get like a very quick overview of the timeline? So we're all gonna go to town meeting and you're gonna propose like the budget and everything. And then the decision will be made whether SMMA will continue with the design process?
We're actually in the process right now of discussing a few different timelines. It's a fairly complex process that involves both the town decision-making and the nature of the kind of plans we want to explore in depth, okay? So it's hard to specifically answer that question right now. I think in about 2 to 3 weeks, we'll have a much better answer to that in terms of the
I'm just confused
timeline.
with the SMMA presentation that they're talking about, special town meeting. Would that be in addition to this?
Again, there are a couple of alternatives related to that, and we're not in a position right now to say this is the one we're still evaluating 2 to 3 alternatives. One is a little faster than another, and in probably 2 to 3 weeks, we'll have a much better direction on a couple that we're exploring in more depth. I'm sorry not to answer it, but I wouldn't want to give you an answer that is not, is that a fair?
I just get a lot of questions about it, and
Yeah, and that's because it's really relevant right now, right? We're trying to, for a whole bunch of different, for the designer, for the school personnel, we're trying to get a reasonable process into place. At the same time, we're trying to figure out what the best way to do it with the town process is.
I think you could generally say that it will require a town meeting vote and a ballot vote to approve.
Next year, and it'll occur
funding.
within the next calendar year.
When that is.
Yeah.
We are not proposing anything for the coming April 2020 town meeting. So it will likely be a special town meeting, because otherwise we'd have to wait for the annual a year later, so.
It'll be next year. It's sort of what time next year and what, there's other things embedded into the schedule that are important also, not just the town meeting. Yes?
From the point of view of communication to the community about the cost of the project and all that, I think it would be really helpful for me when people say, well, why are middle schools so expensive now? Why is that per square foot number more than what we thought it was? To have some background on what's driving those those costs and the sort of the expected educational outcomes of having more square feet per child, or the new model of building the school. I can imagine those questions will come up, and I'd love to be able to say.
Definitely. Absolutely, we want to back up the numbers.
I think they'll really be answered in the process we go through, where we are going through trade-offs and, evaluating against schools that we've seen and all that. I think I would like to know that also, and I can't really answer the question.
Yeah, I think that I would say that. I mean, just in general, as costs go up every year, there's escalation, there's additional costs. Right now, the construction market in Massachusetts over the last, 5 to 7 years has just been on a steady incline, and it's at a point where we're actually starting to struggle to even find workers to actually fulfill the projects. It's just that hot of a market right now. So that's driving the escalation. And then as far as the square footage per student is important, but I'd say the efficiency and the proper use of that is even more important than actually the number. If your program can do something more efficiently and have less corridors there's two numbers when you factor in space. It's the net square footage, which is what you really need, and then the gross, which adds in all the storage rooms and the closets and the corridors and stuff like that. And what we're showing here is the gross, and that is, that is definitely something that factors in there. So, not saying that the average is right or wrong. It's just it's a metric to use to try and understand it.
I would, on a macro scale, I would say the takeaway is we still have the $80 to $100 million range. We're gaining information, about the context of that from a number of different other schools and the way they've done it. So that's where we are, and we will gain information as we go through the design process. Right? Using that as a guideline, by the way. Any other comments, observations? Okay.
Just
Yes.
one quick one. Peter Fashalis, Finance Committee Observer. It seems clear that that we're talking more money than 80 million. So if that's the case, wouldn't it make sense to start really getting that information out sooner rather than later, and let the public have time to kind of adjust? I know you're in the middle of the process, but I mean, as an observer, it's clear to me we're not building this thing for 80 million. So I think it's to still hold to that range.
Yeah, I think that from my position, we're trying to be as transparent as possible with what we know without saying something that's not, that's not real yet, because the designer hasn't even put pen to pencil and looked at our project yet. I mean, I think you can look at these numbers and say it's going to be a challenge, but I'm not yet ready to say it's going to be this. And I don't want to do that multiple times if we're doing it. I want to have a really good informed judgment of a sound educational program that we've gone through with the designer before we start talking about very specific numbers. But I feel a lot of the same things you do. I look at these numbers and say we're going to be challenged, but right now we have to do the due diligence with the designer and the work to be done in order to get it. Okay, and as soon as we feel comfortable with that, we will do that. Your point is well taken. If we go through this and find out that we can't do what we need to do within that range, then we have to share that and make the argument for it.
Yeah, I don't think we're quite to that point yet.
No, I think.
So we've got a lot to talk about, knowing we've said 80 to 100, so.
That's where I was gonna say, is we're saying 80 to 100, and I think, I feel reasonably confident that that's still a reasonable number, that range. What we have to understand, though, is that there is potentially different things that we want to incorporate into that building, and we have to understand what the ramifications of that is.
Right.
And the other thing we have to look at is, there's a lot of factors in there, that there's potentially spending a little money up front might save you long-term operational costs. So in addition to just construction costs, one of the things that we're gonna be evaluating is operational costs and overall return on investment. So there's certain things that you may want to pay a little bit more for up front, because in the long term, it's actually gonna save you money, operational wise. That's something that it's hard to do on an MSBA project, which is another reason why going on your own is maybe the right decision here, is because the MSBA doesn't consider those operational costs. They just want to know what the cost is to build it today. So I think that that's something that, as we're doing our evaluations, we're gonna review that, because I think even if you're on that higher end of that range, if by spending that extra $1 million now you're saving $2 million later, it's a logical conclusion to do that.
And it is everything is on TV. I mean, we put these out twice. I mean, it's not. I think this is pretty detailed for where we are. We don't have a specific number that we think that our school is going to cost, but
We all know we need that sooner than later.
Yeah. Any other questions, observations? Okay. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you.